the tragedy.
I tried, but I got 6.
Okay.
I got 6. I was all planned registered. I got sick.
Haven't heard. I sent an email. No. Yeah, really.
But everybody there at the conference voted.
Everybody could vote, except for newly electeds couldn't vote. If you've been there.
Yeah, you would have won by lost by 2. Would have put the Duggar in a little bit farther. And then it would have even been in worse. I actually think he should be thanking us for losing.
Well, I'd rather have him than that guy from Washington.
I told him it wasn't my vote that did you. She was tossing straight garbage for him. Which is sad.
Oh, just call them.
Okay, I wouldn't, no, I wouldn't. Oh, we already, we talked about it.
I texted Andrew to see if he
It would be nice. I've been visiting a lot with Morgan County's county council.
All right, you
I spent a good 20 minutes with him today. I could have. Did you pass things on? Text. How close are you? Okay. We have a quorum. It's just good information. I'd like as many of the council here as possible. Remember when you came before, how good it was? Did you do Terry?
I emailed him yesterday, but
Okay, I'll
He was-
text him.
he was hoping to make it instead of.
Halfway through this? Oh, well, okay. I probably read that and forgot it.
Right, Curtis can't make it.
I don't, Evan said he might be here.
I think he is.
Are we ready? It is 2:07. I'm calling to order this workshop on land use regulations in Utah. Brent Bateman, lead attorney for the Utah Offices of Property Rights and Ombudsman. Present is Greg Halliday, Council, Jalen Hawks, Mary McGann, Rory Paxman, Ruth Dillon, Council Administrator, Diana Carroll, County Clerk. We also have Mike Duncan from the City Council in the audience, and two members of the Community Development Department, Caitlin Myers and Kenny Gordon. So thank you. We shall begin. Evan Clapper will be arriving late, and Curtis.
Perfect.
Oh, uh-oh.
I
Well,
forgot he
we-
was sitting in my seat last week.
That's right.
I seen that I was watching it online.
Here we go.
That was a long meeting. That's dedicated.
Okay, my name is Brent Bateman, and thank you for inviting me down here. Zachariah invited me down here. Maybe you guys didn't want me to come, I don't know. But I told Zachariah I have a deal with him. If he ever wants me to, if he ever needs my help, I'm here, and I'll come down and do everything I can, and then he helps me. So we have a good relationship. But I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to spend some time with you. I hope this time is productive. I was looking at your agenda, and you guys have a long day.
Oh, yes.
So let's make this as productive as we can. I don't like wasted meetings.
Me neither.
So what we're here to do is we're here to talk about, the law in Utah and land use law and stuff like that. I am prepared to talk about anything you'd like to talk about. If you guys remember when I was here a year or so ago, when I came down, we had a great discussion, had a lot of fun that day, and hopefully we can continue that today. Just by way of introduction, first of all, in case you don't know, my job as the State Property Rights Ombudsman is to protect the property rights of the property owners of the people of Utah. There's a lot of ways that I do that, and I get involved in a lot of different things, a lot of which you guys know about because, we've interacted before. The main thing to keep in mind, though, is that what I'm doing right now is a big part of my job. I am supposed to come here, and I'm supposed to talk to you here, and I'm supposed to tell you, and help you understand and answer your questions about property law, property rights, and land use law, and all that kind of stuff, because that is by far the best way to protect people's property rights is to know what they are. So, that's why I'm here. So, I will also tell you, as I have said before, that I've been doing this for 12 years, and when I first started doing this, I used to create these big, fancy, long PowerPoints with 50 slides. stuff like that, and after a while I got really good at it. They all had animation on them, and sounds, and cartoons, and all sorts of awesome stuff on it, and then one day I woke up and I discovered that PowerPoint sucked. So, I basically just do one slide. I have a couple of other slides in my back pocket in case I need them to explain something in particular, but when I do this, I basically do one slide. And the reason why is this. I have been from one end of the state to the other. I've been to towns from Vernal to Aurora to Paradise, Utah. I didn't even know there was a place called Paradise, and it is nice there. To Delta, to little towns with 25 people, and I know that what those places like Aurora, Utah. Do you even know where that is? It's kind of near Richfield.
Oh, I should know where it is.
There's like 200 people who live there, and they have a huge set of problems, right? But none of the problems that they have in Aurora are probably the same problems that we're having here in Grand Canyon. I mean, and this is a unique place. There is not a lot of other places in Utah. Matter of fact, there is no other place in Utah. It's an amazing place. It's my favorite part of the state. And, for me to sit here to try to tell you what I think you want to know is silly and foolish. It would be a waste of my time. Right? I know you guys have issues. I know you have things going on. I don't know what they are. Right? So what I need is you guys to let me know what you want to talk about, so that this time that we have together is productive, so that I can answer the questions that are pertinent to what's happening in this county, rather than trying to make you guys understand what they need in Logan, which is, couldn't be more different, couldn't be more of a world away. So having said that, I bring this slide, I put it up on the wall, and the purpose of the slide is to just kind of look at and jog your memory about things I get asked about a lot. How are you?
Good.
No problem.
This,
To see if
Evan
there's
Clapper's
anything you
arrived.
want to talk about.
The city is considering, correct, getting rid of all conditional uses. And I know last time when you talked, you said a conditional use, you cannot listen to public clamor if it's a conditional use.
Correct.
So I wouldn't mind a review on when you can listen to public clamor and when you cannot, and by doing so you can get yourself in trouble. And what are your ideas on what the city's doing as far as conditional use?
That's awesome. We can do that. Talking about public clamor, talking about the public, requires a quick review, which we do not need to spend a lot of time on, of the difference between legislative and administrative decisions. Right? And the reason why we have to do that is because that is the difference on public clamor. Okay? As the county council, you guys make a lot of legislative decisions. You probably make a lot of administrative decisions too. And knowing the difference is going to help you to understand when to listen to public clamor. Okay? Now again, this is an oversimplification, but a legislative decision makes the law. Right? Makes the law. If you're doing a legislative decision, you are doing something that amends papers, that amends the books that you have. Right? That amends an ordinance, or amends a zoning area, or moves a zone from one area to another, or amends a zoning map. Any of those things, they change the books as a legislative decision. Again, that's a way oversimplification. We can talk about why. But that will get you 95% of the way there. Okay? So, if someone comes to you and asks for a zoning change, you're making a legislative decision because you're changing the law. If somebody comes and asks you for annexation, you're making a legislative decision that you're changing the law, you're changing the books. Okay? The administrative decision does not do that. An administrative decision just applies the law to an application. So someone comes to you and asks for a conditional use permit. They're not asking you to change your books. They're asking you to apply your conditional use permit rules to their application for the use that they want, to their property. Right? If someone comes to you asking for a subdivision, they're not asking you to change the books. They're asking you to apply your laws to their land. Right? So it's like everything we learned in civics class when we were in elementary school. There's 3 branches of government: the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. Right? Well, it's the same thing here. Okay? The legislative branch in Salt Lake is the legislature, the House and the Senate, right? Here, the legislative branch is the county council, right? The city council, right? They're the ones who have been given authority to make law. Right? The executive branch, you know, is President Cuckoo Bananas in Washington, and it's up in Salt Lake. It's Gary Herbert, right? And down here, it's a little bit different because it's whoever the council says it is for different things. But they're doing the administrative work. Sometimes the council might do that. Sometimes might have planning commission do that, or sometimes they might have the staff do that, and all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't matter. That's not making a law, because only the council can make a law. And there's some more details we'll get in. That's just a quick review. When it comes to the public, when it comes to a legislative decision, it's time to make law, right? You should encourage the public to speak as much as possible. And you should listen to the crazy things that they say. Right? And you can consider all the crazy things that they say. And if you agree with the crazy things that they say, by all means, go with it. Okay? And if you meet somebody in the grocery store, right, and they come up to you and says, what is this kookiness about this law that we have? Can we get that changed? And you, oh yeah, well, okay. You know, and you can think about that, and you can have those conversations with people. Right? And the reason why is because this is a legislative decision. A legislative decision is a policy decision. It's not a legal decision. It's a policy decision. You are, when you're making a legislative decision, you are making rules that your community has to follow. You're making laws. And those laws have to do with what the community is supposed to be. What do you want your community to look like? You know, where do you want hotels? You want them here, but you don't want them over there. Where do you want schools and stores, you know? How tall do you want the buildings, you know? Over here, I'm not going to want buildings very tall because one of the great things about it is we get to see the Red Rock up there or whatever, you know? And so we don't want that blocked. So we want them to be small, right? Those are all questions of what do we want our community to look like, right? What do we want our community to be, right? Those are policy decisions, okay? And how are you going to know best what that's going to be if you don't talk to us through the phone? Right? They voted for you, right? And as you know, if you don't do what they want you to do, they're just going to vote for somebody else. Right? So if you're doing a legislative decision, by all means, let the people come, let them tell you their crazy stories, sit there all day and listen to them, consider them, and do what they ask you to do if you want to. Right? Administrative decision, however, is different. Administrative decision is not a policy decision. An administrative decision is a legal decision. It's a legal decision. But what that means is that when you have an administrative application here, like someone's asking for a conditional use permit, okay, you are not, no part of that decision is, do we want this here? You are never looking at that saying, is this a good idea? You're never doing that. You're never looking at that and saying, if I say yes to this, the public is going to vote me out. Or you're never looking at this and saying, if I say yes to this, it's going to open the floodgates to all sorts of horrible stuff. You are never saying that because it is not a policy decision. A conditional use permit and other administrative decisions are legal decisions. That means the only thing that you need to decide is, does this comply with our laws? Does this application comply with our laws? We have a set of laws. We look at the application, we apply that. Is it in compliance? Yes. If it is in compliance, the answer is yes. If it is not in compliance, the answer is no. Or, you know, a lot of times the answer is bring it into compliance if you can. But that's it. That's it. And so you can see how this affects the public. Okay? Because what the public does is when they come in for administrative, when you're trying to decide an administrative decision, they come in and they line up here at the podium, and they're all here and they're screaming and hollering at you, and they're saying, don't you dare approve this. If you approve this, horrible things will happen. If you approve this, our air will be contaminated. Maybe true. If you approve this, traffic on the street will increase to the point where we can't get anywhere. Also maybe true. If you approve this, my children will die. I hear that all the time. Yeah, eventually, yeah. Especially if they play in the street, right? I literally, I was in a planning commission meeting the other day, and there was an administrative question on there, and there were maybe 25 people lined up, and every single one of them said that. Every single one of them said, if you approve this, people will die, children will die. And the question was always, how do children die? Well, my children are used to playing in that street, and if you approve this, traffic will increase, and they'll all get run over. And you want to go, don't let your kids play in the street, right? But, you know, that's what they say. And none of that has anything to do with your decision of whether or not this complies with our law. Even if their application will contaminate the air, and even if their application will create smells or noises, even if their application will kill children, if their application is compliant with the law, right, that means that you said that we want that here. So the answer is yes. You say yes at that point. No matter how many people come and line up here out the door. Does it comply with the law? That's a good question.
So the only people in an administrative decision that you should be listening to is someone who comes in and can say, this isn't in compliance because, and they have a legitimate, is that correct?
You remember, you must have taken good notes last time.
No, I didn't. That's why I'm taking good notes this time.
Yeah, you remember, because here's the thing. You're only looking to see whether it's compliant with the law, and you can consider evidence of that. Evidence. Okay? Evidence is facts. Right? Evidence is facts. Evidence is not horrifying stories. Evidence is not, I'm sure that this is going to happen if you prove this. Evidence is facts. So if somebody comes with you with facts that indicate whether or not this is compliant with the law, okay, you can consider those facts. You don't have to decide if you line with those facts either, but those are something you can consider. Okay? Because you're only allowed to consider evidence when you're doing an administrative decision. When you're doing a legislative decision, no one cares about evidence. It's all preference. It's not evidence, it's preference. You're deciding what you want in your town and what you don't want. And your power to make that decision is huge. Your power to say what you do and don't want in your town is huge. You can really make your town into whatever you want it to be, as long as you do it legislatively. Right? And then when the administrative thing comes along, you know, you apply it, and if you apply it right, you know, your town should be what you want it to be. The big problem with this, of course, as you guys I'm sure know, big problem with this is that the public never comes when you're considering legislative decision. They never come. You have a law change or a zoning change on the books, and maybe a couple people come, right, or whatever, or maybe nobody, right? And you go ahead, you make the decision, and they don't get a chance to speak, and it makes them mad, right? But then when someone comes with an actual application to build, you know, a gas station or whatever, and the neighbors don't want the gas station, that's when everybody comes, right? But you can't listen to them. You can't listen to their clamor at that point.
But zoning is legislative, correct? Okay.
So you could have listened to their clamor if they had come, right? And they could have come and said, you're changing the zone to allow gas stations. I don't want gas stations. And the next 10 people all said they don't want gas stations. And you say to yourself, great, no one wants gas stations there, so let's not make this change and allow gas stations there. And if you do that, great, you get to do that, right? The problem is no one came. And so you decided, okay, we'll allow gas stations there, no problem, right? And then everybody comes when someone applies for a gas station, and it's too late because you've already said we want gas stations here. And this guy has come with an application for a gas station. He just has a gas station because what he's doing complies with the law. So the trick is to try to get people aware and to hear their comments during the legislative decision, not during the administrative decision after the training. And sometimes they do.
More does.
It's tough. It's tough. So that's the public clamor situation. You need to remember. That. And I don't know how much I talked about this last time I was here, but every property owner, everybody who owns land, their basic right is to do anything they want with their land. Right? We all have that right. If you own land, you get to do anything you want with the land. Which means that if I own land next to an elementary school and I want to put in a stripper joint, I get to do that, right? Unless the exception applies, and the exception is zoning rules, ordinances that the local government creates. So as a local government, you realize you don't want stripper joints next to an elementary school, so you create zoning and say, hey, the stripper joints have to stay over there, right? And the elementary schools can be over here. You can do that, and that's legal, right? But you got to remember that that's the exception. The rule is I can do anything I want. Okay? The reason why it's important to keep that straight is because you need to remember that if you don't say they can't do it, they can. If you say they can't do it, they can. But if you don't say anything, they also can, because they still have a right to do anything they want. In order to control what happens in Moab, you need ordinances that says what people can and cannot do, because they have to follow those. But they don't have to do anything else. They just have to follow those rules. So if you want rules, you have to pass ordinances. So you have to take legislative action. You pass the rules, right? Hopefully they follow them, right? If they don't follow them, you can cite them or whatever. Do whatever you can do, right? But you pass rules, and then people have to follow. No rules, no rules. They can do whatever they want. They don't have to ask you for permission to do things. You don't give them the right to build. They already have the right to build. You limit their right to build. You limit what they can and cannot build. Yes, sir.
At what point is their rights conflict with the neighbors?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because the neighbors got certain rights too. So at what point do they cancel out each other or impact each other?
That's a great question. And that's a thing that I spend a lot of my day answering. A question I spend a lot of my day answering. And the answer to that question is, it's involved in knowing what is a property right and what isn't a property right. Okay? Because a lot of things that people think are property rights are not. The best way to think about it, though, is what I just said. Remember that your base right is to do whatever you want on your land. If there's rules, right, then you have to follow the rules. But whatever is in the rules, you have a right to do. Right? Which the problem that we have is people on one land don't want the people next door to them doing a certain thing. They don't want the people next door to them doing a certain thing. Right? And so they say, if you do that, that will violate my property rights. Right? When, as I just told you, that person has a right to do whatever they want, just like you do. You can do anything you want on your property, and that person has a right to do anything they want on their property, within the rules. Okay? That's a long-winded way of answering your question, but I'm going to answer it in a short-winded way right now. People do not get to tell each other what they can do or cannot do on each other's land, unless it's done in an ordinance. Land use ordinances that are passed by the council, is the only legal way to tell people what they can and cannot do on the land. So if there's an ordinance that says that you can't do this, you can't do it, and letting them do that would violate this guy's property rights. Because this guy has a right to have the ordinances apply to the neighbor. Right? But if the ordinances say they can do it, and the guy next door doesn't like it, but the ordinances say they can't do it, the guy next door does not have the ability to tell that guy he can't do it. He doesn't. Because this guy gets to do whatever he wants on his land that's legal. And so, if he doesn't like what they're doing, he can come to you guys, right? And he can get an ordinance passed saying you can't do it. But that is the only way to tell people what they can and cannot do on the land. That's the only way. Otherwise, people get to do what they want.
So codes are like ordinances, correct?
What's that?
Codes
Yes.
are
When I
ordinances.
say ordinances, I'm talking about the local laws, the local codes, all those kinds of things. But it actually has to be in the code. It actually has to be written down in the code. That's the only thing. Think about this for a second, okay? When we're talking about land, we're talking about controlling land and the way people use land. We are talking about a freedom, right? And when we're saying someone can't do something on their land, we are taking away one of their freedoms. Freedom to use my land how I want. Okay? We do that. We do take away that freedom, right? Why do we take away that freedom? Because we want to live in an organized society. We want to be able to live together peacefully. You know, we don't want people fighting and warring across their borders all the time. So we do that, right? But it's still taking away our freedom. And there's only one way we allow that to happen. And that is through elected officials. We vote for people. And we give them power to tell us what we can and cannot do. That's our security. Because if we don't like what they're telling us, we vote them out. That's our check and balance, right? But we only allow the people that we vote for to tell us what we can and cannot do. No one else gets to. And so we vote for people. They join the council. They now have this power to make laws. And so they make these laws, and that's how they tell people what they can and cannot do. Right? But it's the only way. Without a law, you can't tell people they cannot do something. There's one limit to that you need to keep in mind, and that's the limit of a nuisance. But that usually comes out of an ordinance as well. I mean, if someone's doing on their land, something on their land that's a nuisance, that's a threat to health, safety, and welfare, right? That's usually an ordinance violation as well. You can't have that, right? But one thing I hear a lot is the property value argument. If that guy does this, or if that guy across the street does that, or whatever, that's going to ruin my property value. That's going to damage my property value. Okay? You don't have a right to your property value. No one has a right to their property value. You don't. You just don't. Things happen in town that affect your property value all the time. Most of the things that happen make it go up, but a lot of things happen make it go down. The city decides to put a road in a certain place, and everybody along that road, suddenly their property is worth a ton more. Right? And everybody who's apart away from that, suddenly their property is worth a ton less. So what? That's the way it is. But people are always, if you let this guy across the street do this, it will ruin my property value. You don't have a right to that. What you do have a right to do is you do have a right to have that guy follow the ordinances. And if he's following the ordinances, you can't tell him what he can and cannot do. If he's breaking the ordinances, then you can stop him. So that's the limit. Is that right? It's all about the ordinances.
Oh, I was just curious about grandfathering, but why don't you go?
I was just wanted to just go back to nuisances. So you say if they're creating a nuisance, that's a legitimate concern. But that nuisance on some level, in some way, has to be referred to in the ordinance. Is that correct? Or
Yes
can
and
they
no.
just prove that, say for instance, in the city they're dealing with what they're calling bunkhouses, which they couldn't complain because they're saying these bunkhouses are lowering the value of my property. But they could complain if they say these bunkhouses are an extreme nuisance because now we don't have places to park on our street. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
I'm trying to see where the...
I can explain that.
Okay.
First of all, you do need nuisance ordinances and good ones. Okay?
You need
If you
nuisance
don't
ordinances.
have, check your code. Make sure you have good ones. Make good nuisance ordinances. But despite your nuisance ordinances, there is a general definition of nuisance that is helpful to think about, which is really even going to trump your ordinance, but you still need good ones. And that is this. A nuisance is something that threatens health, safety, and welfare. Threatens health, safety, and welfare. Okay? That means that if the nuisance isn't stopped, someone's going to get sick or killed. That's what that means. Right? So, toxic fumes coming off of somebody's property because some activity they're doing on their property. Even if that activity is legal, toxic fumes, that's a nuisance because it could kill somebody. Right? However, smoke coming off of somebody's property. Are you blaming somebody for toxic fumes? Is that what you're pointing?
No. You can pass some letters up here. Just pass
Okay,
them.
just I thought Pete did toxic fumes. Smoke, however,
Terry.
as much as it's a pain, you know, that's not a nuisance unless it's, you know, constant and filling somebody's house and could cause them to be injured. Right?
So there are nuisance ordinances.
Yeah.
Nuisance ordinance?
Things like vermin, like having something that has rats. Rats can cause injury, they can cause death. That would be a nuisance. However, a thing that could cause rats, but they're careful to not cause rats because they keep it clean and stuff like that, not a nuisance. Just because it could cause rats doesn't make it a nuisance. Right? Something like parking, like you were saying about with the city, that's not a nuisance. Just because it's going to be more inconvenient, you know, that doesn't make it a nuisance. It's got to be something that's going to kill people. It's going to injure people. It's got to be health, safety, and welfare related. Yeah.
We've got a situation out in Castle Valley where when they make their shutdown, they didn't take into account moving the roads that belong to the subdivision.
Okay.
So all the acreage, each lot is 5 acres. They abundant the next one.
Okay. So there's no room in between.
So what they did was they put the roads on part of, the roads on somebody's property.
Okay.
All of them.
Yep.
Okay.
Because there was nowhere else.
Nowhere else. So the main road is 66 feet deep easily. Side roads are 50 feet.
Yep.
They all come out of somebody's front yard. So the next situation, where does the private property rights end?
Great question.
And the right-of-way rights for people using the road begin.
You bet. That's a great question. And since that's kind of a different subject, I just want to make sure we got what we needed to get your question answered about nuisances and stuff. And then we'll move on to this subject because it's a good one. It's a good one.
Yes, Mike.
Madam Chair, with your permission, your meeting.
No,
City of Haldane, been in the news lately about apparently borderline administrative versus legislative type decisions. The city of Moab could be facing something similar to that, so I'm just kind of curious, what's your take on the Haldane situation?
Okay. All right.
Quick, I know we have a lot of.
Well, we'll get that. That's good.
well, I think, yeah, it's a good
Are
one.
we still good with nuisances?
Does anybody?
And
Do
you
we?
had something, Ruth.
About grandfathering rights.
Okay. Well, we'll get to all of that. Okay? We'll do yours first. Yours. Okay? So, because we're already talking about legislative and administrative decisions, the city of Holiday, it's hard to talk about that without discussing this question of referenda. Okay? And if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. Referenda should scare the living daylights out of you.
You should.
Because it's going to cause, it can and will cause a lot of problems.
Would you kind of define referendum?
The referendum is, in the Utah Constitution, citizens have the right to legislate, okay? Not only do we elect legislators, a council, a legislature in Salt Lake, or whatever, you know, the Utah Constitution has given citizens the right to do legislation, which means that if their elected representatives don't do the law that they like, they can do it themselves.
To a referendum?
Yeah, there's two ways to do it, actually. There's an initiative and a referendum. It's not important to remember this. But initiative is where they start the process themselves. They make a law that they can't get anybody to make, and they start that on their own. A referendum is when a law has been made by the body, and they want to overturn it. They don't like it. Right? And so what they do to do a referendum, and they can overturn what you say. What they do is they go out and collect a certain number of signatures, okay? And if they get that number of signatures, they get it on the ballot, and people vote for it, right? Which means that you guys can make a decision, and they can get overturned by this vote, okay? The reason why that should scare you is because it's almost never done honestly, okay? You guys make a decision that somebody doesn't like it, so what they do immediately is they hire a bunch of college kids to walk around and knock door to door, and all the college kids usually say is they open the door and say, do you want to have a say in what happens in your community? People say, yeah. Sign right here. Do you want to say in what happens? Well, sign right here. Nothing to do with the issues. you know, and that's what they tell them to say. And they collect the signatures like that, it gets on the ballot, and of course, once it's on the ballot, you know, people are gonna say, I don't want that, it will cause change in my community, the children will die. Right? And so they can vote against it. Now what happened in Cottonwood, in Holidays, up in Salt Lake Valley, is there's the Cottonwood Mall. The Cottonwood Mall is lots like all malls, you know, the age of malls is dead, right? It's over. Right? And the Cottonwood Mall is now a wide open empty space, and it is the only developable area in Holiday, and the only undeveloped area in that entire section of the Salt Lake Valley. There's nowhere else to develop. Everything else is full. Okay? And we're in a housing crisis right now. So the city of Holiday said, well, this is a perfect place for us to do our part to help the housing crisis. Right? So we're going to put in apartments and shops, you know, and stuff like that. It is right by some nice transit hubs. It's an area. It's easily accessible. There's tons of roads. It used to be a mall, for crying out loud, right?
It was appropriately zoned already.
Yep, and it was already zoned.
These are permitted use and so forth.
Right, right. And so they entered into this agreement to develop it, right, years ago, and they had this development agreement. And so things happened and it didn't develop that way, and so now Ivory Homes has come along and they said, let's get this developed. And so they made a slightly different plan, right? And they submitted this slightly different plan to the city of Holiday, and Holiday loved it, right? And so that required an amendment to the development agreement. So they did an amendment to the development agreement. Great, right? And the citizens went nuts over, or at least some of them did, right? And this has gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and it has been voted on, right? And the plan that has been voted on lost. The referendum succeeded, right? And Ivory spent $1 million something bucks, a couple $1 million bucks on this thing, and the city of Holiday wants it and needs it bad. You know, they need to revitalize that area. It's getting to be a real hole, you know. And they need more housing. They have this really, really bad need for housing and stuff like that. The citizens will move down. What is before the Supreme Court now, right, even though it's been voted on, the Supreme Court hasn't decided what's before the Supreme Court now is whether or not the amendment to the development agreement is a legislative or administrative decision. Right? Because if it's an administrative decision like the city thinks it is, and like Ivory Homes thinks it is, if it's an administrative decision, you can't do a referendum on that. Because that's not making law. The citizens' legislative power is the power to make laws, just like your legislative power. Okay? So you can't do a referendum on an administrative decision. They all think it's administrative. But the citizens have argued that it's a legislative decision, that it makes law. Right? And if it makes law, it's subject to referendum. We've already had the referendum, but it means it's been voted down.
No, the Ivory Home. So.
And the Supreme Court hasn't told us, one way or another, whether or not it's legislative or administrative. That's what's being fought about. There's no question that the referendum succeeded, though. That's the point. The referendum absolutely succeeded. The question is it even subject to a referendum? And so that means that all this work that the council did, and all this work that Ivory Homes did, and all this time that they spent over years trying to plan what the perfect thing is for this part of the community, and trying to get a plan in place that works and it's awesome and that they love, and they finally got it, is gone. All that work is over if that's subject to referendum.
Okay, but in your professional opinion,
Is it subject to referendum?
yeah,
My professional opinion is administrative. But, having said that, I have not been that close to the situation. So I don't know the details of it. But I did listen to the court's hearing, and it was a 2-hour long hearing. And the court usually hears things in like 30 minutes. And it was a 2-hour long hearing, and hearing some of the questions from the court, I think the court was clearly leading to a being legislative decision.
The court's leaning towards legislative.
But I don't know. They haven't decided yet. That's what's happening here. There you go. Okay, roads. Okay. So, here's the thing about roads. There are about 20 ways to create roads. 20 ways. And some the ways they're used most often is obviously if somebody subdivides, they put roads off their plat, and they dedicate those roads, right? And a lot of roads were created when the town plan was put in place. You were saying they forgot to do that. But a lot of towns, their town plan was put in place and they put roads against them, and that also creates illegal roads. As a county, you probably have seen this well. Matter of fact, I know you have because I know there's a lot of issues in that. But one of the ways of creating roads is what's called the road by use, right? Which is where, you know, a Jeep just goes and drives, and then another Jeep just goes and drives, and then pretty soon there's a track there, and they just go and drive, and just go and drive, and just go and drive. Pretty soon that becomes a road. Right? Does anybody remember how long it takes for that to become a road?
The back wheels.
For what?
Once the front wheels go, there's a road. The back
As
wheels.
soon as the back wheels hit it, it's a
Yeah.
road.
Are you serious?
No, that's not the answer.
Wow.
That's good.
It takes 10 years, 10 years of continuous public use. So for what's that? Yeah, that's good. It has to be used without interruption for the 10-year period, as often as needed. So that doesn't mean every day, that doesn't mean all the time. There's a court case that even says that even if it's closed throughout the entire winter because of snow, because it didn't happen, okay? But in the summer they used it, that's still legal. If somebody who goes in there once a week or once a month, right? But no interruption. And after 10 years, and it has to be by the public, which means that it's not just the people who live there, it's by whoever, right? So if it's used as a thoroughfare for 10 years, continuous public use, bam, it becomes a road. And it's over, right? And what happens is that the people who own that property no longer own it. It just goes to the ownership to the public. That's all there is to it. Usually, if they want to use your property for a road, they have to come buy it from you. But if the public uses it for 10 years, it's a road, and they don't own enough of it.
Situation here is that, according to the court policy, we can still own that property without paying any property tax.
Right.
So that technically they don't own it anymore.
Not technically, absolutely.
They don't own it.
And there are a lot of cases where people do pay property taxes on roads like that for years and years and years. I don't know how, let's see, there's Redwood Road in Salt Lake, it's a huge, massive road. Right? There's Geneva Road in Utah County, huge road that goes all the way down. Right? Both those roads were created this way. They were created by public use, no one ever dedicated it. And there are still people paying taxes on a portion of those roads.
Do they not realize it?
They don't realize it. I mean, I talk to them all the time, and I say, go down to the county and say, this is a road, right? And every time they do, the county says, oh yeah, you're right. And they cut it off and just stop paying taxes. People just don't realize it. You know, and they're still paying taxes on the road, and they haven't owned it for maybe 80 years.
If the person that the road is on their plan,
Yeah.
they don't own it,
Right.
who owns it?
It's owned by the public, which means it's owned by whoever owns those things for the public in that particular case. So it's the case it would be the town.
So it's incorporated down.
And counties especially deal with this all the time. Because there's like some road going over some hill someplace, right? And people just have kept using it, and finally someone says, oh, I want this road closed. And you're all, well, that's a road. Well, prove to me it's a road. Well, it's a road by 10 years of use. It's been 10 years of use. So now it's the county road. The county owns that road. And so in their case, it's going to be the town who owns that road. Now, you asked about the width of the road. That's very, very interesting question. Because, you know, it is important to know where your land ends and the road begins, right? How do you know where that happened, right? But the road was created over 10 years of use, right? So, like, there's not a line in the sand, you know. What the courts have said is it said a boundary to the road, and between the road and the property, is wherever the is necessary under the circumstances of that road for safe travel. So that means that it depends on how it was used for 10 years, first of all, right? If it was used just as an ATV trail, it's not going to be very big. If it was used as cars, it's going to be bigger. If it was river road, it's going to be huge, right? It was used that way for 10 years, so it's going to be big. Where the actual line is depends on that road. It depends on how much space is necessary for safe travel. So what that means is that you have the pavement of the road, and you have a little bit off of the pavement that's needed for safety. Well, it's still as wide as needed for safety. So if it's a little community road, you're never probably going to have more than 2 cars going like this, right? And if someone breaks down the middle of the road, you'll need a few feet to pull off for safety. Right? So that's how wide the road's going to be. The road is going to be wheel tracks plus enough on the side to pull off for safety. If it's Redwood Road, you're talking about there's going to be a lot of shoulder needed for safety. Right? For an ATV trail up in the hills or whatever, there's not going to be very much. Just inches maybe, a couple of feet.
24 feet runs.
Right.
No.
Okay.
14 there's, so it's 50 foot each, 24, something like that, 12 and a half feet on both sides. But the problem is, that's not being, it's undeveloped, it's just raw, the way it was. And there's a shoulder thing, so it's not really needed to pull off.
If the road was created by use, no dedication or any other way it's created, the road is not going to be wider than the ditch, right? Because that's going to the ditch, and you don't need any more than that for safety cars. If for some reason something has ever been recorded or something that makes it 50 foot wide or whatever, then even though there's a ditch and everything else there, that's still road, right? And so people, nothing happens there, or maybe people plant their carts there, or plant trees and all that stuff there. And those trees and all that stuff there may be there for 100 years. That's never going to not be road unless the town abandons it, which means that if the town ever wants to expand that, they can. And they don't have to pay anything. They can fill in your ditch, they can tear down your trees, they can pull out your garden, whatever they use to expand it, because that is still road, even though it's being used by you ever. So yeah, so a lot of it depends on how the road was created. If it was just created by use, the width is whatever's necessary for safety. Roads are fun. Roads are an interesting thing. They're always a challenge to try to figure out how they were created. Most of them were created in the 1800s. It's hard to track down. Okay, what was next?
Grandfather, right?
Grandfather.
Did you have something specific about grandfather?
Well, I was just thinking about land use code ordinances change, and they affect properties usually going forward. But what about the property, the next door neighbor?
Yeah.
Did it affect that property too, or not, or does it depend?
Remember when I talked about how someone comes in with an application and complies with the code, you have to say yes, you don't like it. Right? It's true. But that doesn't mean you have to say yes to the next guy. Right? If someone comes in and his application complies with the code and you don't like it, what you want to do is you want to get that code changed to pass. Right? So that the next guy who comes on with the application won't be able to do what you want him to do. That first guy, though, you have to say yes to, because he got his application, he's vested, he gets to go. But as soon as you change that code to make what he's doing no longer legal, okay, at that point he's grandfathered. Right? It's the actual terms, he has a legal non-conforming use. Okay? It's legal, but it's non-conforming. It doesn't conform, but it's legal, and he gets to do it. When you're grandfathered, you get to continue to do what you were doing forever. Even though it's illegal, even though you don't want that here, if it was legal when it started, right, and they continue to do it, they don't abandon it, they get to keep doing it, right? They just get, and it goes with, it runs with the land too. The guy sells, the guy dies, whatever, the next guy gets to keep using that land, right? Okay? There are two ways to make grandfather uses go away. One is to abandon them. Okay? if the use is abandoned for a period of 1 year, then they lose their grandfather. If they stop doing it for 1 year. So say the grandfather use is animals, okay, like horses, okay. Somebody applied, or maybe even before you have the code, they had horses on the land. And I have the code, the horses are not allowed on the land. Okay, well, their grandfather, they get to keep having horses, or you know, it's not allowed anymore. But they decide to go on a cruise for a year, right? And so they get rid of all their horses. The horses are gone, okay? The horses are gone 364 days. And they come back after 364 days, and they put the horses back on the land. They're still grandfathered. They get to have them. But say they're gone 366 days. They lost it. It's gone. They no longer get to have them. And that's what we see. Like, we see situations like where they had a dozen horses and they got rid of about 4 of them. Okay? And then 2 or 3 years later, they want to go back to a dozen. Well, they've really lost their ability to have dozen. They can stop 4, they're still left running 4, and they abandoned the other 8. So they lost that right to be out of the code. The other way to get rid of grandfather use is what's called amortization, and I don't even want to talk about that because I don't like it and I don't think it's legal. But I'm in the minority on that. Amortization is another way. Basically, with amortization, what you do is you give them time to recoup their investment in their use, and after a while, usually you just shut the deal. And you can talk to your attorney about doing that if you really want to, or call me and I'll tell him what I think. He won't care. He'll just do what he wants.
And what if the legal non-conforming property is sold?
Runs with the land. Runs with the land. So I have those horses. I sell it to somebody else. They want to keep horses. They get to.
Oh.
And I die and I leave it to my kids, and they want to keep horses. They get to. So
it goes with the land, not the owner. Is that right? It goes with the land, not the owner.
Correct. Correct. Counties see this a lot with things like junkyards and stuff like that. I don't know if you guys deal with any of those. People who like hoarders or whatever, they have a lot of junk on the land, and they've had all that junk on the land before it was illegal to have that junk on the land. And now you can't get rid of the junk because the grandfather. And you're hoping that they die so that stuff will go away, and then they die, and then their son is a worse hoarder.
That's where nuisance can come in.
That's where what can come in?
Nuisance codes.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
So, say there is like this junkyard that has been grandfathered in. Was it titled junkyard, or were they just hoarders?
That doesn't matter, because
Doesn't
if it
matter.
was legal, if it wasn't illegal to do, remember I said right at the beginning, they can do whatever they want on the land unless you pass an ordinance that says they can't. This is a perfect example. If there's no ordinance saying that they can't have junk, they can have junk, right? You pass an ordinance saying they can't have junk, right? But what they were doing was legal before, because you didn't say they couldn't have junk when they started having junk. So that's perfectly legal, so they're grandfathered, and they get to continue to have the junk. Now, they can't expand it, they can't make it worse, but you can lose your grandfathering that way.
If you make it work.
So what's your definition of junk? Just curious.
I mean, I don't have a definition of junk.
Okay.
You guys can put it in the code.
All right.
The
Which we
following is
did.
junk.
We did. And we did a lot with how it's stored more than what the material
Like outdoor storage, or
Or, just.
vehicles on the ground, they could leak oil into the watershed or whatever. I believe that.
Excuse me? Yeah, we do. We worked really hard on it. That was one place when we had quite a bit of public comment.
pass legislation on that, which means that you can tell them what they can and cannot do unless they're grandfathered.
So say we did pass 3 years ago a land use code and junk and such is, no law, you can't have that. But say, so we go out to enforce that, we have to prove that they've increased the junk since the land use code was put in? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's a lot more complicated than that. The idea of what you're saying is correct. But as a lawyer, my job is to split hairs, right? Let's split some hairs, okay? They have the burden of proof to prove that they're grandfathered. Which means if somebody out there has junk and that junk violates your code, you go out there and you try to enforce, okay? If they claim grandfathering, you can't make me stop because I'm grandfathered. They have the burden to prove that.
They have to prove it?
They have to prove it. If you want to say yes, but you abandoned that, or you expanded it, that's your burden of proof. Right? So first they have to prove that they're grandfathered in the first place. Right? So if somebody has something, they're doing something that's against the code, go enforce it. And if they can prove grandfathering, then back off and leave them alone, unless you want to try to prove abandonment.
Or increase.
Or expansion. Expansion for a junkyard would be hard to prove. It would be hard to prove. But basically, the way you're going to prove it is by square footage, not by the amount of junk. Really. You're going to prove it by saying that you did not have junk over on this acre, all of your junk was over here. Now you're starting to put junk on that acre. That's expanding. It's going to be difficult, impossible, but difficult to prove, to say, well, you parked one more car here, so you're done. Because the junk is going to change up. My wife's uncle is a hoarder, so I know what this is about, you guys. He is literally committed hoarder.
They're scary, does that answer your question, Ruth?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Anything else?
Jaylyn has a question.
Yes, first of all,
Yes.
last time you were here, I was so impressed that I intended to put you on speed dial, but I'll need your number this time.
Okay. My number
Thank
is...
God.
I have to look up my own phone number. Don't call me. I know that it starts with an 801. And once I hear the first number, I remember it. There it is. It's 801-530-6391. And my email is bbateman@utah.gov. bbateman@utah.gov.
Okay, now my second question is probably hypothetical, and it may be somewhere between people developers and what I'm seeing lately.
All right.
Suppose there's a community which there's a general feeling that they've reached carrying capacity as far as overnight rentals and hotels a long time ago. Yeah,
Just hypothetically.
we keep, yeah, right. And the community keeps accepting new applications because it happens to be a permitted use in our commercial zone. Now, suppose this same community decides we've had enough, we're gonna take that use out of highway commercial. As I'm hearing you say, we have every right to do that in the ordinance, and in fact, it's been tossed about a bit, and of course, all of the lawsuit threats immediately come from. So, I guess what I'm seeing part of it is, if the community chose to do that, what does either side have to do to win the inevitable law?
That's a great question. And let me make sure this is, since you're asking a very legal question, so I'm going to split hairs on this answer too. Okay. You need to make sure You need to make sure that the steps you are taking to stop these rentals or hotels or whatever is a legislative step. Okay? Sometimes, especially for a legislative body, you think you're taking a legislative step just because it's you doing it. Okay? But that is not the case. Right? Sometimes, as a legislative body, you are taking an administrative step. And if you take a legislative approach to an administrative step, then the inevitable lawsuits you are going to lose. Okay? So if you try to stop them through some kind of administrative process by saying, for example, putting conditions on them that go beyond what you can legally exact, or putting conditions on them that are not reasonable in order to get their permit, or starting to say things like, we don't want unrelated people living in the same home, or all those kinds of things, right? When you start to take those administrative steps to do this, you're going to lose the lawsuit. Okay? Because like I said, if they comply, you have to say yes. If you don't say yes and they comply, they will sue you in land. If you are taking legislative steps to do this, okay, then you will win the lawsuit. It's as simple as that. And what you described is a legislative step. It is a permitted use in a particular zone. You don't want it in there anymore, so you take it out. And now you've made it a prohibited use. And guess what? It's prohibited everywhere in town. There's not a single place in town where we're going to allow this. You're going to win that lawsuit. Because you're taking a legislative step. You're telling people what they can and can do and not do on their land, and that's going to make them angry. Right? Because they don't like to be told what they can and cannot do on their land. But as I said to you, that if you pass ordinances, you get to do that. If you use ordinances to do it. Okay? So if you're sure you're doing this legislatively, you're on good ground. There are certain things that you cannot completely prohibit from your town, like sexually oriented businesses. You cannot have no place in town or even in the county where that cannot go to anything. Right? Sexually oriented businesses. You have to allow them to be somewhere. Correct. Correct. A business whose orientation is sexual.
Strip clubs.
Like an adult.
An adult
shop.
shop.
Adult bookshop, a lingerie store, a strip club, a
Brothel.
I'm not saying you have, gay,
Profit.
straight, and business. Those three are not. That's the first time I've ever told that joke. But I don't know of any prohibition on things like hotels or nightly rentals. Any reason why you have to allow those in your town. Except for the fact that if you don't allow those in your town, you're probably going to get voted out of office.
Which might not be a bad idea.
Which might give you a break.
I know how you
Might be awesome.
Yes, Michael.
So, to elaborate on that theme, I heard somebody tell the story earlier. If you're hypothetical, suppose the city were to hypothetically remove from one of our commercial zones a highly profitable use, for example, hotels. I have been told by to do so. You can remove use, you can downzone. You can remove uses from zones as long as you didn't present the order with no recourse for a way to make a return on this investment. Okay? That's a little different. So if you took hotels out, hotel overbuilt, and that's exactly what you do. What you just said a moment ago is after expansion, we can do whatever we want before the listing.
I don't have the slide that I want to refer to, so I'm just going to do it the hard way.
Things could be granted.
Okay, so this is how this is going to go down.
We're talking about million dollars.
existing uses are grandfathered, right? So let's use the, it appears to me there's an order.
There is.
I don't want anybody to come and roast me if we talk about hotels specifically, so can we talk about litigation? So let's talk about hog farms.
Hog farms.
Yeah. Say you have a zone where hog farms are allowed. Okay. And say you decide you don't want hog farms anymore. Okay. The hog farms are permitted use in the zone. Anybody who already has a hog farm gets to keep their hog farm. Right? There's no question about that, and you can't do anything about that. You may not want to do anything about that. Okay. Anybody who has applied for a hog farm gets to do the hog farm. Okay? Because now we're talking about vesting. Vesting. Okay? Remember that if you make application to do something, and that application applies, you get to do it, you know, and changes in the law do not affect you. It's almost like you're immediately grandfathered as soon as you apply. So anybody who has brought in an application for a hog farm gets to do their hog farm. Okay? Other people might have bought a piece of land, hoping to put in a hog farm, right? They might have bought a piece of land at the hog farm price or whatever, okay? But you decide you don't want any more hog farms on there, okay? And so you change your ordinance so it doesn't allow hog farms anymore, okay? Now the next guy who comes in with an application for a hog farm, as I told you, your question is, does it comply or does it not? So they're asking you for a hog farm and it doesn't comply, because you now no longer allow hog farms. They don't. You can't have a hog farm there, right? That guy is mad, right? Because he paid a hog farm price, right, for that hog farm. Okay? And he threatens to sue you, and he probably does sue you. Okay? You almost certainly win that lawsuit. Okay? But I have to say almost certainly because of what you raised. Okay? What you raised is the question of what's called a regulatory taking. Regulatory taking. Okay? A regulatory taking, an unconstitutional taking is when the government takes private land. When they just take it, right? And we think about that in terms of the government taking our land, the government coming and parking their trucks on the land and building a building on our land and moving onto our land. They've actually taken physical possession of our land. They have taken our land. That's the usual kind of taking, right? But there's another kind of taking called a regulatory taking. And it's just the same, except for instead of physically occupying the land, the government comes along and passes rules that essentially take away the land, that essentially physically occupy it. Right? So if you pass rules that make it so that land is no worth to them, is worthless to them, right? You have taken their land. And it's just like if you occupied it, and you have to pay for it. Okay? Now, the regulatory taking, how that works, is it works under this standard that is, it's one of those standards that keeps attorneys in business because it really doesn't have that specific definition. But the standard is, does the regulation that you made go too far? Go too far. You are allowed to regulate these things. I told you that. You're allowed to tell people what they can and cannot do in their land. I told you that. Okay? But you can't take that too far. When you start telling them that they can't do anything on their land, when you completely wipe them out so they can't even have Boy Scouts camping on there, right? You have taken their land because their land is now worthless. It's worthless, right? And if that's the case, you have to buy it. You have to buy it from them because you have taken it, right? But remember that I also said that you do not have a right to a property value, right? Which means that if you don't go too far, you can pass rules that affect property values and even negatively. You're gonna have to live with that. People will vote you out of office, but that doesn't mean you're gonna lose that lawsuit. Right? The case we always refer to in Utah comes out of Sandy. I think I talked about this last time I was here. But it's a case in Sandy where there was a shopping center, an area that was perfect for a shopping center, and the guy had it appraised, and it was appraised for $500,000. The city came along and they rezoned it, right? And then after they rezoned it, he had it appraised, and it was worth like $200,000. He went from $500,000 to $200,000 on the value of that land. And the court said there's no taking.
Excuse me, I didn't hear you.
Even though you've wiped out that much value of that land, you haven't gone too far. You've gone far, but not too far, so that you've taken the land, because they can still do stuff there. They can still build it. Okay? So when we're talking about hog farms, you don't want hog farms anymore. So you take that out of your code, and you now say hog farms are prohibited. The hog farmers are certainly now. What they're going to do is they're going to try to prove that you went too far. Because you wiped out a bunch of their value, and they've lost money now, certainly, right? What you're going to try to prove is you're going to try to say, you can still use that land. There are things you can still do. We have not wiped you out. Just because you cannot have a hog farm anymore doesn't mean you can't have a shop or a home or something else like that. Okay? If it is in the situation where they can't have anything there, then you're talking about a taking. But if they can still use that in a profitable way, in a way that is, when I say profitable, I don't mean more money than they spend, but in a way that's productive, way, generally you're not going to go too far. So that's why I say that kind of lawsuit that they're threatening, generally you're going to win, because you have the right to tell them they can't put a hog farm there. Right? But they're going to try to prove that you went too far. And you've got to be careful of that. You don't want to go too far. You have to make sure that they can build you something worth a while there. Because you cannot stop development. I talk to a lot of councils who really say, I was elected to stop development here. I was elected to stop things and make sure nothing else happens here. Guess what? You can't do that. Because as soon as you try to stop development, as soon as you pass a law that stops development, you've gone too far. That's a taking. You have to buy the land. People get to develop their land. So you have to just give them a way to, you have to give them a way to develop. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the way they want. You can make rules. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Did we get there?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
So I have a question in relation to that, that concerns vesting. So, the county decides they don't want hog farms, and they write legislation that says, and this meeting is, I don't know, December 1st, and they write legislation that says, as of June 1st of that same year, all hog farms are not allowed. Legislation gets passed on December 15th. The guy comes in on September 15th, applies for a hog farm. Is he still vested?
That's a great question. And I'm going to answer that question by saying this. Remember that there is an exception to the vesting rule. Remember in Utah, we vest as soon as we apply. Remember we apply, we vest. As long as our application conforms with the ordinance. Okay? But the one exception to the vesting rule is what's called a pending ordinance document. Okay? And that means that if you have an ordinance that's pending, right, either because you're working on it, or because, like you said, it's got this much time until it becomes effective, okay, then that also will defeat vesting. So people come and apply, and you have this ordinance is pending, right? They don't vest, okay? But an interesting thing about the way you asked the question, because the way you asked the question is there was more than a 6-month period for that ordinance to be pending. Okay? The pending ordinance doctrine is only effective for 6 months.
And what if the ordinance, the beginning of the discussion of the ordinance is post his application, but the date, effective date of the ordinance is predating his?
If the ordinance became pending, which means the discussion came post his application, right? He's vested.
Right.
He's applied, and then you started to work. He gets to go. The rest, no one else does. He gets to go. Okay? If his application was after the discussion started, you started the discussion. Okay? The ordinance is pending, and you have 6 months to get that ordinance in place. Okay?
Once the discussion starts, it's pending?
Once the discussion officially starts,
It's on the agenda.
I'd say that's what does it. And the reason why I'd say that's what does it, because no court has ever told us what that means. But I'd say once it's on an agenda, you're probably official. And once it officially starts, the clock starts clicking. You have 6 months to get that done. If you don't get it done after 6 months, the minute that 6 months is up, his application misses. Just like that.
Okay, so one other question that we'll use the hog farms for. The hog farms are doing really well, and so a lot of hog farmers love the hog farm area. So lots and lots of them come in and build hog farms, and the sewer
Everyone
system,
loves bacon.
Sewer system,
Everybody loves
yeah, it's
yeah.
good for bacon, and the sewer systems can't handle any more hog farms.
Right.
So the powers to be say, look, we can't handle any more hog farms because we don't have the infrastructure. We can't build the infrastructure. We'll never have the infrastructure. But do they have to say you can build a hog farm, but you got to take care of all your problems, like your hog, whatever, refuse?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
Because development, you can ask development to pay for itself. Okay? Development creates impacts. When a hog farm comes into your community, they create impacts. Impact on the sewer, I imagine, is a huge one. Okay? They create impacts. Okay? You don't have to provide them with the facilities for those impacts. Okay? You can make them do it. They should pay for themselves. Okay? But you cannot make them pay for one bit more than what their impact makes a need for. Okay? You cannot have them fix the problem for you. Okay? Just to fix their share of the problem.
But what if the problem can't be fixed?
Well, that's a rare circumstance, and it's going to create a huge problem for you, okay? Because your option in that situation, if your code says you allow hog farms, and if they come in with an application for a hog farm, as I said, you have to say yes to that, okay? And so you can ask them to fix the problem, okay? But you're going to probably lose a lawsuit when someone comes in and says, I made a legal application for a hog farm, and they said no because the problem can't be fixed. Okay. You're probably going to lose that lawsuit.
So what happens in communities like Cedar City that have overdeveloped their properties and have no water to supply to the people that are building houses?
Then they need to pass an ordinance that stops it. Okay?
Stops what?
Stops whatever is causing the problem.
Well, the
okay?
problem is there's no water in the ground.
Right. But they have to allow something. They still have to allow something.
Well, they can allow the people to haul water, I suppose.
And what they will do in that case is they will require people to find their own source of water.
Okay.
But because of property. Okay.
But if you allow something, if you don't want something, you have to disallow it or they can do it.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and if you don't have the facilities for that, that is something you should seriously be considering dealing with. But make sure that you really don't. Make sure that if you're saying we're not, we're going to say you no because we can't do this. Make sure you really can. You know what I'm saying? Because that's a lawsuit you're just dying to lose. And also keep in mind that if you take away their ability to do something, that's fine as long as they can do something. There's never going to be a situation where you can tell people they can do nothing. If you do that, you're fired. It's tough. It's tough. And your line of questions shows a lot of thought because it underscores how difficult this is, right? I come here and I tell you all this stuff and it's very simplistic, right? Until I walk out here, right? And as soon as I walk out here, you think, oh, I understand everything. And somebody walks in here and the first thing happens is, oh, what did he tell us to do with this? I don't know. He didn't ever mention this. I don't know how to handle this, right?
That's why we have your phone number.
That's why you have my phone number. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, and it's tough to be in your job because of the myriad situations that you could face. And you have to worry about things like, the amount of water you have, and the amount of capacity you have for sewer, where you want drain fields, and you have to worry about stuff like infrastructure. And you guys are a county, and I don't know if you guys even provide services. Do you guys provide municipal services? Do you provide electric, sewer, anything like that to people?
Depends on where. We don't provide it, but they have to go hook up to it.
Yeah, they'll have to hook up to the town, right?
The
Either
special
annex or
services.
enter an agreement, right?
It's through our Grand Water service.
Indirectly through.
Special service
Special
districts?
service districts.
Well, in a way, then you do. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Some counties are directly provide services, like Salt Lake County, and Summer County, they directly provide services. Most counties don't, right? So most counties can say to people, well, if you want to develop, great, right? But we can't provide these services for you. We don't have any ability to. So you're either going to have to figure out a way to get these services, or you're going to have to annex it to the town. That's what most counties say. So, and if you can figure out a way to get those services, grant. Happy day. Enjoy. But if you can't, you know, that's not our problem. We don't provide services, so we cannot provide services to you. You better annex. So that just goes to show you. It's a great line of question. I'll mention, you started by talking about conditional uses, okay, and how the city is getting rid of a lot of theirs.
Well, aren't you almost going to not have conditional uses? Is that what the city's looking at from what I'm reading?
I'm sorry.
The city, the city's looking at not having conditional uses, correct?
Correct.
They're, because they do cause oftentimes that public,
Attention.
and the public clamor, and that's, you can't listen to public clamor on a conditional use.
I just want to make sure you understand where that comes from, in case you're considering doing it. Okay? It comes from this place. You cannot put a condition on a conditional use unless you have a standard in your ordinance to relate that condition to. Okay? What that means is your ordinance has somewhere written in there some kind of goal, right, about noise or about light or about, sound or something. And somebody comes with a conditional use permit and you have that standard for sound, and so you impose a condition on them to keep the sound down. Okay? Where this idea of getting rid of conditional uses comes from, it makes a lot of sense to me, is the best standards are specific, very specific, okay? For like sound. We don't want noise in this zone above 200 decibels. I don't know how that is, but above 200 decibels, okay? So anybody who comes in can't make noise more than 200 decibels, right? Well, that's no longer a standard. That's no longer a goal. That's a rule. That's a rule. You're just saying 200 decibels is the limit. Don't go above it. Okay? So you're not imposing that as a condition. You're imposing that as a requirement. Right? And so there's no condition to impose. So why have a conditional use? Does that make sense? If you have really good standards, your standards are really just going to be rules. Really going to be requirements. Right? And the reason why people have conditional uses is because their standards aren't that great. We just want you to keep the noise down. That's our standard. And so you impose a condition that they keep the noise down, right? And that causes problems. That causes a lot of debate. How loud can they be? Are they being too loud? That causes lawsuits. Are not being too loud? Yes, you are being too loud. Well, you don't say what too loud is. You just say keep the noise down. All that kind of stuff. It just creates all this fuzziness, right? When the best ordinances are ones that are specific, people come to know exactly what they have to do, and you know exactly what you can tell them, and you tell them, and they have to do it. And there's no argument. There's nothing to sue about. And so that's the thinking behind getting rid of conditional uses. It takes some work, but it takes out a certain amount of fuzziness out of the ordinances, just imposes the rules that you want. And there's no problem.
Oh, well, so Mayor, we have taken conditional uses out and we put standards, base standards, which we will elaborate on, just like Brent suggested. We try to make them objective, quantitative where we can, but inevitably there are still subjective, ambiguous standards in there. You have to look, and we'd love to get rid of them. And that's why I take a bit of issue with what Brent said. Everything you say taken as well-intentioned, but still there's always this, inevitably there's what's reasonable to one person is not necessarily reasonable to somewhere else. I mean, you put standards in, there's a neighbor, new occupant shall make a reasonable effort to comply with noise in the neighborhood. Well, what's reasonable to one guy is not reasonable to someone else. And that's where the discretion of council comes in. And is it legislative, is it administrative, I don't know, but you can see how it gets.
It gets very confusing. There's
Yeah,
a real
that's
gray.
interesting.
I'll absolutely acknowledge that, and that is never gonna go away. One of the problems you have is attorneys, right? They're the worst. But attorneys are always gonna try to find some way to argue with you that the sun is not gonna rise tomorrow. Right? And so that is never gonna go away. So yeah, I acknowledge that what you're saying is 100% correct. It is not gonna solve my problem. No question. But it's an effort to maybe improve things. And maybe it works for some places, and maybe it doesn't.
Anybody else have a question?
Forgive me, Madam Chair, I do have one more. I think the city, as you may have heard, whenever you guys,
No, I think, go ahead.
these actions,
Yep.
so you may know, City Council just recently passed needs action B on not just hotels, but on other overnight lodgings in general.
Oh, yeah.
It's all based on the Nexus study, which the county participated in, which attempts to demonstrate a lot of numbers and database in the Salt Lake, Utah area, and areas we can approximate this area, which essentially illustrates that hotels and similar businesses can still make a fair profit and afford to pay a fee that exacts or land or housing removal of that.
Oh, for the assured housing.
And we expect to be legally challenged.
No, you don't expect to. It's already happened.
That's fascinating, but that's no big surprise there.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion on that?
Okay, so, first of all, I gotta tell you that my phone is ringing off the hook. Of course, what my phone is ringing off the hook about is the hotel developers, right? And I feel like, and I'm just talking about one. Guys. I feel like that you guys are doing what I told you you can't do a second ago, and that's fixing a big problem on one person's back. That's what they feel like. I'm not saying that's what you want, okay? But that's what they feel like. They feel like you guys have a big problem with housing, with, exclusionary zoning alone, housing, stuff like that. Like you're making the hotel industry solve that problem. Okay? Also, I will say that, these guys, I'm sure all know this, you may not, but I think you probably do. That right now, my office is working on an advisory opinion. And what an advisory opinion is an opinion that is requested from my office where we try to predict what a court would say if it went to court in order to keep it from going to court, right? If we we know what we're talking about, hopefully, and if we say something, people can look at that and say, oh, that makes sense, I think they're right, and maybe they won't sue, right? And maybe this thing will get resolved. And we're working on that right now, like, this opinion is going to be done in a matter of days, maybe a couple of weeks, I don't know, because it's hard to predict how long these will take, and this is not an easy one. This is not an easy ones, we can crank them out, but we know this is a hot button topic, right? We know that whatever we do, we put it in the paper, right? And so we want to make sure that we get it right? So we're being very careful. That's why we're doing so. So all I can really do is I can really talk to you about the principles involved and let you understand why this is such a deal, such an issue. Okay. Now I said a couple of things a second ago that really apply here. Right? That you cannot fix your problems on the back of just one individual or an industry. You can't. Okay. Because that's an excessive exaction. Right? Development pays for itself. Okay. You can't require development to pay for other people's problems or mistakes or issues. Okay? That's principle, right? And that's what I'll apply here. Also, another thing that you need to know is that these kinds of fees and stuff like that, I think clearly are exactions, right? Because you're asking someone in exchange for approval to give something to the community, to give something to the public, right? Whether it benefits them or not, it doesn't matter. Anytime you ask somebody to give something to the public, be it anything from cash to land to roads to parks, whatever, that's an exaction. And it has to meet these proportionality rules, okay? Proportionality between what you're asking to do and the impact. Another consideration is that in Utah, we have very clear case law. And what the case law says is it says that what you ask to do, there has to be a causal solution here, right? What you ask them to do has to be the solution to a problem that they created. You cannot ask them to provide you with a solution with a problem that anybody else created. Only a problem that development creates. So if somebody comes in here with a hog farm, right, you can ask them to do things that solve the problems that come with a hog farm. Okay? But you cannot ask them to do things that solve all the problems that you have. It has to be a problem they created. Okay? So the situation you're discussing, right, what you're asking them to do, right, has to solve a problem that building a hotel creates. Right? Now, having said all that, I'm giving you any opinions on this, okay? I will tell you that our office has already issued 2 opinions on similar matters. A lot of you probably know this. Okay? And what both opinions said is it said that there's no causal solution here. Okay? You're asking to give a fee in lieu of affordable housing because they're building homes. And we do not see how building homes creates a problem that is solved by building homes.
What?
Does that make sense? How does building homes create a problem that building homes solves? Okay? And one of those opinions was done by my office, and one opinion was sent out to an independent attorney, and they came to the same conclusion. This is all in all a little bit different than those, right? And so we're trying to figure out how that works. Okay? But that's where it comes down to. It comes down to the question of, what you're doing is, in my opinion, is noble. What you're doing is, it's a great attempt to do something that's really needed. What you're doing, it makes sense on paper, and you guys did it right. Right? And what I mean by did it right is they did their studies. Zechariah has worked totally hard on this. Right? And you've got your studies all in place and everything. Okay? The question is, are you putting a burden on someone's back that the public should share together? Are you making the one person solve a bigger problem that they're creating? That's the problem. That's what we're trying to figure out.
But didn't
Well,
the,
I will take issue with it now that my understanding is, my understanding is that many of the issues you described are defensible. The city is leaving that.
Of course they're defensible. If they weren't defensible, you wouldn't do it. Yeah. But the fact that it's defensible doesn't mean you win. It also doesn't mean you lose.
I just asked what your opinion was.
Yeah. The fact, you wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been defensible.
no,
And you wouldn't have done it if you hadn't had a good reason and a good basis for it. And I'm not saying that you did. I'm not saying you did. Right? It's just that we have to determine whether or not what you're doing is legal. And we're just going to give you that opinion, and that's what it's going to be, just our opinion. Nothing else. It's not going to have any force of law or anything. Right? You can count on lawsuits from these hotel owners. At least what they're saying to me makes a difference. Okay? If my opinion comes out in your favor, that could be good, because that will give you all the more basis that to defend those lawsuits, because they're going to happen. If my opinion goes against you, you'll want to consider that. Okay? And don't forget about the attorney's fee provision, to the attempt to extent that makes you think about it. What I mean by that is that when we do an advisory opinion, right, if we decide in a certain way and it does go to court, and the court agrees with us, in other words, the court says the same thing that we said, only in that case, right, if we're completely wrong, right, but if the court says that we were right in the first place, okay, the court can award attorney's fees to the party that challenged it. They don't have to, they can. Okay? So again, if it comes out in your favor and the hotel owners don't like it and they decide to sue you, right, and the court says that we were right, then you can get attorney's fees from the hotel. But the vice versa is also. But besides that, it's not enforceable. It's an attempt to prevent a lawsuit. It's an attempt to stop a problem from becoming a huge problem, which this is. In fact, from what I can tell, anyway, the fact that we're doing an opinion is the only thing keeping this from going through right now. There you go. That's the story of that. Any more details of it?
So the nexus study is what we use to determine the appropriate manner in which to set those fees and such on certain businesses. Correct?
Yeah.
And that we were advised to do that, and we
Yep.
did.
And you did do it. And from what I can tell, you did a good job of it. Okay? My job is to figure out whether those nexus studies are correct. That's all. Okay? Just because you got nexus studies doesn't mean they're correct. But they might be. Okay? And again, it's about this cause and solution problem. It's about this cause and solution problem. Does the solution solve a problem that their development causes? That's the critical question.
Well,
And-
is that the critical question, or is the critical question to what extent financially?
That comes into it. I mean, that's like some part A of that question.
I mean, it's clear that if you build a 100-room hotel, you're going to need X number of employees, which means X number of employees have to be housed. If that hotel weren't built, you wouldn't have the need to house that many employees. So,
First of all, that's not clear, but what you're saying makes sense, so I'm not going to get the issue with it. But the extent is going to be a major factor, yeah. I mean, are you asking them to solve a bigger problem than they're creating? Are you asking them to build more houses or contribute more money than the number of, maids they're going to need?
of course, that's the issue. Because if you tell the hotel, you've got to pay me 20 to 1, they're going to say, see you later. And if you tell them you're going to pay me 3 to 1, say, well, okay, so I'm giving a percent of my profit back to the community, and that's doable.
Yes, sir. That's an accurate statement.
Here, my understanding is that the nexus study, that the number, the fee that we're asking for is based on two parts. A, it has to satisfy both, and A, it has to be workable in the hotel. And the other, it has to be reasonable, consistent with the number of workers in the hotel of a certain size.
That's all well and good, but who decides what's reasonable?
That's the
In terms
nexus
of-
study.
Well,
The nexus study.
See, that's the problem. And that's why.
Well, how's that the problem, doing the study?
Because if you say, look, you're gonna build a 100 room hotel, and we're gonna decide that, you can afford, because you're making a profit of X number of dollars, you can afford to put $15 per,
Square foot or something.
per square foot into a pot that's going here. Who's deciding whether or not, that's basically deciding what's the proper profit for that developer to have. And, only a developer can decide that. He may be operating on a 2% return or a 20% return and be happy with either. So, that's a hard question.
It's a hard question for a lot of reasons, but it's a way harder question.
Yeah.
Okay, think about this, for example. Okay? Say the hotel is going to need 10 employees that need low-income housing. Okay? Is that mean the hotel has to build 10 homes? I mean, what does the hotel have to do? What is their responsibility? They have this many feet. What exactly do they have to do in order to assuage their demand? A lot of that is going to have to do with what availability already is in the community. A lot of that is going to have to do with what is defined as a low-income housing. A lot of, it's a complicated question. Now, the Nexus study got into that, right? And it tried to address it. Okay? As I said, if the Nexus study is right, great. Our job is to see if it is or not. The hotel owners are very adamant that it's not, as you would expect.
Yes. Any other questions? This was incredibly informative.
Was it fun?
Yeah, yes, it's,
Good.
I learned even more this time. The first time you came here, it was like, wow, real eye-opening. If there's no further questions, I would suggest we take a recess until our next meeting at 4, which has got, what is it, FF? JJ, MM, where are we on the agenda? Which has, so, thank you.
My pleasure, and call me if you need anything.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
We're to HH. I was close. Evan?
Yeah.
Jaylen, what I was going to do is just express our sadness over the loss of, Johnson, Hillquist.